Document Part 6 the next morning brought no relief. Emily woke up feeling more exhausted than when she had gone to bed, her mind heavy with unanswered questions. The events of the previous night replayed in her head like a broken record. The scream, the torn jacket, the glowing eyes in the darkness. She glanced at Buddy, who was lying peacefully by the fireplace, its fur shimmering softly in the early light. For a moment she wondered if it all had been a nightmare. But then she saw Jake pacing anxiously in the kitchen, his face pale and drawn, and reality came crashing back. "We can't stay here," Jake said abruptly, breaking the silence. He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his voice firm but tinged with desperation. "Whatever's out there isn't going away. It knows we're here, and it's not afraid to come closer." Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "Where would we go? This is our home. It's not safe anymore," Jake insisted. "Not with that thing, those things out there. And not with," he trailed off, glancing toward Buddy before finishing quietly. "Him inside." Emily felt a surge of anger rising in her chest. "You think Buddy is the problem? He hasn't done anything wrong?" "I didn't say he has," Jake shot back, his frustration boiling over. "But you have to admit, everything weird started happening after you brought him home. Coincidence?" "I don't think so." Emily clenched her fists, struggling to keep her voice steady. Buddy needed help. He was hurt, alone. "How could I just leave him there?" Jake threw up his hands in exasperation, "'Cause maybe he doesn't need your help. Maybe he's using you to get food, shelter, whatever. You're smarter than this, Emily. Open your eyes." She opened her mouth to argue, but hesitated, the words catching in her throat. Deep down, she knew Jake wasn't entirely wrong. Buddy's behavior was intelligent, almost too intelligent. The way it mimicked sounds, solved puzzles, studied its reflection, it wasn't normal. Not for an animal. But even as doubt crept into her mind, she couldn't bring herself to believe Buddy was dangerous. There was something about it, something warm and trusting, that made her want to protect it before the argument could escalate further. A knock at the door interrupted them. Both froze, exchanging wary glances. No one visited the cabin unannounced, especially not at this hour. Jake grabbed the baseball bat from the corner while Emily cautiously approached the door. Through the peephole, she saw Dr. Alan Hughes standing. Outside, looking concerned. "It's Dr. Hughes," she whispered to Jake, unlocking the door. She opened it just wide enough to speak without letting him in. "What are you doing here?" Dr. Hughes held up his hands, showing he meant no harm. "I've been thinking about what you told me, the metallic shard, the footage of the creature. Outside, I wanted to check on you both. Are you okay?" Emily hesitated, glancing back at Jake, who still gripped the bat tightly. Finally, she stepped aside, allowing Dr. Hughes to enter. Buddy watched curiously from the corner, its ears perked. Up but otherwise calm, Dr. Hughes nodded toward Buddy. "This must be the creature you found." "Yes," Emily said, her voice softening. "His name is Buddy." Dr. Hughes knelt beside Buddy, studying it intently. Buddy tilted its head, watching him with those luminous eyes. "Fascinating," Dr. Hughes murmured. "Its physiology is unlike anything I've ever seen. The fit's almost adaptive, like it changes color based on its surroundings." Jake crossed his arms, clearly skeptical. "Great. So it's some kind of alien chameleon. What does that mean for us?" Dr. Hughes stood, brushing off his knees. "Means we need to tread carefully. This creature is extraterrestrial and I believe it is. Then it may have abilities or instincts we don't fully understand. And if there are others like it..." He let the sentence hang, the implication clear. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you think they're hostile?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," Dr. Hughes admitted. "But we should assume they're unpredictable. Intelligence doesn't always equate to benevolence." Jake snorted. "That's comforting." Ignoring him, Dr. Hughes turned back to Emily. "Have you noticed any changes in its behavior recently? Is anything unusual?" Emily hesitated, glancing at Buddy. How much should she tell him? She decided to stick to the basics. It's been acting normally, at least, as normal as it gets. But last night, we heard noises outside. Something attacked Jake's jacket and ran off with part of it. Dr. Hughes frowned, his expression growing serious. "Did you see it?" "No," Emily admitted. But we caught it on camera. Its eyes there. Just like Buddy's. Dr. Hughes nodded thoughtfully, and it's likely connected. Whether it's part of a group or simply drawn to Buddy, I can't say. But you're right to be cautious. What do we do? Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly. Should we send Buddy away? That's not a decision I can make for you, Dr. Hughes said gently. But consider this. If Buddy is part of a larger ecosystem or species, it may already have ties that you can't sever. Sending it away might not stop whatever's coming. Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes. The thought of losing Buddy was unbearable, but the alternative, staying and risking their lives, was equally terrifying. She looked at Jake, hoping for guidance. But his expression remained stony. After Dr. Hughes left, the tension in the cabin returned full force. Jake resumed pacing, muttering under his breath about leaving immediately. Emily sat on the couch, staring blankly at the floor. Buddy padded over to her, resting its head on her knee. She stroked its fur absently, trying to focus on the warmth of its body against hers rather than the fear bubbling beneath the surface. Later that afternoon, Emily decided to take matters into her own hands. She set up hidden cameras throughout the cabin, positioning them in corners where they wouldn't be easily noticed. If something or someone was sneaking in at night, she needed proof. Buddy watched her curiously as she worked occasionally. Nudging her arm as if asking for attention, she smiled faintly, scratching behind its ears. Just in case, she murmured. I'm not giving up on you yet. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest grew eerily quiet. Normally, the chirping of crickets and rustling of leaves provided a soothing backdrop to their evenings. Tonight, however, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the cabin settling. Emily tried to distract herself by scrolling through her phone, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Buddy and the shadowy figure outside. Jake stayed glued to the window, keeping watch with the flashlight in hand. If anything moves out there, I'm ready, he muttered, more to himself than to Emily. You can't stay up all night, Emily said softly. We'll take shifts. No, Jake replied firmly. I'm not leaving you alone with that. Emily bit her lip, knowing better than to argue. Instead, she curled up on the couch, pretending to sleep while keeping one eye open. Buddy lay beside her, its breathing slow and steady. Every now and then, it would twitch, as if dreaming. Emily envied its apparent peace. Around midnight, the cameras began recording movements. At first, it was subtle, a shadow passing across the living room, barely noticeable. Then came the sound of claws scraping against the wooden floor. Emily's heart raced as she sat up slowly, straining to listen. Jake spun around, shining the flashlight beam into the darkness. What was that? He whispered harshly. I don't. No, Emily replied, her voice shaking. Buddy stirred beside her, lifting its head alertly. Its glowing eyes scanned the room, locking onto something near the doorway. Suddenly, a low growl filled the air, not from Buddy, but from somewhere else in the cabin. Emily's blood ran cold as she realized the source of the sound was moving closer. Jake tightened his grip on the flashlight, stepping protectively in front of her. Stay behind me, he ordered, his voice barely audible. The growl grew louder, accompanied by the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unnervingly silent. Emily clutched Buddy close to her chest, her mind racing. Whatever was coming, it wasn't human. It wasn't friendly. In the dim light, a pair of glowing eyes appeared in the doorway, identical to Buddy's, yet colder, more menacing. Emily gasped, her breath hitching in her throat. The creature stepped forward, revealing itself fully. It was sleek and feline-like, just like Buddy, but larger and more muscular. Its fur shimmered with an unnatural glow, casting eerie shadows. On the walls, Jake raised the flashlight, shining the beam directly into its face. The creature flinched but didn't retreat, its gaze fixed unwaveringly on Buddy. For a moment, the two creatures locked eyes, communicating silently in a way Emily couldn't comprehend. Then, without warning, the intruder lunged. Document. Part 1. The sun was setting over the dense forest, casting long shadows across the ground. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, a scent that Emma had grown to love during her time in the wilderness. She adjusted the strap of her backpack, letting it rest more comfortably on her shoulders as she walked along the narrow trail.
Ow.
Her boots crunched against the gravel. The sound blending with the chirping of birds and the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by the wind. This part of Montana was remote, untouched by most humans, which made it perfect for her work. Emma was a wildlife biologist, someone who studied animals and their behaviors and their natural habitats. For weeks now, she had been sent here to investigate. Reports of strange activity in the area. Local hunters claimed they'd seen an increase in predators: bears, wolves, and even cougars, but something about their descriptions didn't add up. They spoke of creatures moving too fast, too quietly, almost like ghosts slipping through the trees. Some said they'd never seen anything like it before. Others whispered about legends passed down through generations, stories of beasts that weren't entirely of this world. Emma wasn't one to believe in myths or fairy tales. She preferred facts, data, evidence she could touch and measure. But there was something intriguing about these accounts, something that pulled at her curiosity. So here she was, deep in the woods, ready to uncover whatever truth lay hidden beneath. The canopy of towering pines. By the time the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, Emma decided it was time to set up camp. She found a clearing near a small lake, its surface shimmering faintly under the rising moonlight. The spot seemed peaceful, isolated enough that she wouldn't be disturbed, but close enough to water if she needed it. After unloading her gear, she pitched her tent quickly, her hands moving with practiced ease. Once everything was secure, she started a small fire, the flames licking hungrily at the dry twigs and branches she'd gathered earlier. As the warmth of the fire spread around, Emma opened a can of beans and began eating straight from the container. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling, and after hours of hiking, she didn't care much for luxury. The forest around her grew quieter as night settled in. The daytime sounds replaced by the hoot of an owl and the distant croak of frogs near the lake. She leaned back against a log, staring into the flickering flames, letting her mind wander. It was then that she noticed it, a pair of eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, just beyond the edge of the firelight. At first, she thought it might be a raccoon or maybe a fox, drawn by the smell of food. But as the figure stepped closer, Emma realized it was no ordinary animal. Its body was sleek, muscular, and covered in short fur that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Moved with a fluid grace, each step deliberate yet silent. Its head was shaped somewhat like a cat's, but larger, with sharp features and those piercing, otherworldly eyes that locked onto hers. Emma froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. Her heart pounded in her chest, not out of fear exactly, but out of awe. The creature didn't look aggressive, simply stood there watching her with an intensity that made her feel both exposed and oddly safe. Slowly, she lowered the spoon and held out her hand, palm open. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, to her surprise, the creature took another step forward, closing the distance between them. Up close, it was even more striking. Its fur was a mix of gray and black, patterned in a way that reminded her of storm clouds. Its claws were retractable, glinting faintly in the firelight, and its teeth looked razor-sharp when it parted its jaws slightly. Yet despite its menacing appearance, it didn't attack. Instead, it sniffed the air cautiously, its nose twitching, as it caught the scent of the food without thinking. Emma grabbed a piece of leftover meat from her meal and tossed it gently toward the creature. It landed a few feet away, and the animal hesitated, its gaze shifting from Emma to the food and back again. Finally, it crept forward, picked up the morsel in its mouth, and retreated to the edge of the clearing, where it devoured it in 2 quick bites. When it finished, it turned its attention back to Emma, tilting its head slightly as if studying her. "You're not so scary, are you?" Emma murmured, smiling faintly. She reached for another scrap of food and offered it, holding it out in her palm this time. The creature watched her carefully, its tail swishing slowly behind it. After a long pause, it approached again, its movements smooth and deliberate. This time, it stopped just inches from her hand, its warm breath brushing against her skin as it took the food. Emma fought the urge to flinch, forcing herself to stay still. When the creature backed away, she laughed nervously, running a hand through her hair. "Well, I guess we're friends now," she said, half joking. "How about I call you Buddy? Does that work?" To her amazement, the creature let out a low rumble, almost like a purr, before sitting down on its haunches. It continued to watch her, its glowing eyes reflecting the firelight. Emma couldn't explain why, but she felt a strange connection to it, as though it understood her in a way no other animal ever had. Maybe it was the intelligence in its gaze or the fact that it hadn't tried to harm her despite having every opportunity. Whatever it was, she knew she wouldn't forget this moment anytime soon. As the night wore on, Buddy stayed near the campsite, lying down in the shadows just outside the circle of firelight. Every now and then, Emma would glance over at it, marveling at how calm it seemed. Yet she wondered what kind of creature it was, whether it belonged to some rare species scientists hadn't discovered yet, or if it was something else entirely. For now, though, she pushed those questions aside, content to simply share the quiet evening with her unexpected companion. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with her, and she crawled into her tent, leaving the fire burning low. As she drifted off to sleep, she could hear Buddy moving around outside, its presence oddly comforting. Little did she know, this encounter was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything. She thought she knew about the natural world and about herself. Document. Part 3. The days that followed were a mix of wonder and unease for Emma. Buddy remained a constant presence, its sleek form always nearby, watching her with those piercing eyes. During the day it seemed almost playful, trotting alongside her as she explored the forest or lying lazily in the shade while she worked on her notes. But at night, something shifted. Buddy grew restless, pacing near the edge of the campsite and occasionally letting out low growls that sent shivers down Emma's spine. It was as if the creature sensed danger lurking in the darkness. Danger Emma couldn't see. Despite her growing attachment to Buddy, the image of the mutilated hikers haunted her. She replayed the scene over and over in her mind, trying to make a sense of what she'd seen. The clean cuts, the absence of blood, didn't match anything she knew about predators. Wolves tore flesh, bears crushed bones. What she'd witnessed was precise, methodical, almost surgical. And then there was Buddy's behavior. Why had it warned her? Was it protecting her from whatever or whoever had done that? Emma decided to call for backup. Exploring alone was one thing, but this felt different. This wasn't just a scientific expedition anymore. It was something far more complicated and potentially dangerous. She pulled out her satellite phone and dialed Jake, a colleague and close friend who specialized in tracking large predators. Jake had been skeptical when she first mentioned coming to Montana, dismissing the reports of strange activity as exaggerations. Now, though, he might be willing to listen. "Jake," she said when he answered, her voice tight with urgency. "I need your help? Something's going on out here, and I don't think I can handle it alone." Jake hesitated on the other end of the line. "What do you mean? Did you find something?" "I'm not sure yet," Emma admitted, "but it's big. Bigger than I expected. Can you come out here, please?" After a long pause, Jake agreed. "All right, I'll pack up and head your way. Just stay safe until I get there." Relieved, Emma hung up and leaned back against a tree. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Jake could help her figure out what was happening. Maybe together they could uncover the truth about Buddy and about whatever else was hiding in these woods. 3 days later, Jake arrived at the campsite. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a perpetually serious expression. His arrival brought a sense of normalcy to Emma's chaotic world. He carried a duffel bag filled with equipment cameras, traps, tranquilizer guns, and wasted no time setting up his gear. "So," Jake said, looking around the clearing as he unpacked, Where's this mysterious predator you've been talking about? Emma glanced toward the edge of the campsite where Buddy sat quietly, observing them both. That's him, she said, nodding toward the creature. Jake froze, staring at Buddy with wide eyes. Wait, what is that? That's Buddy, Emma replied simply. He's been with me since I got here. Jake took a cautious step forward, studying Buddy intently. It looks like... I don't even know what it looks like. Some kind of hybrid. Is it a cougar? A wolf? What is it? Emma shrugged. I don't know. That's why I called you. I've never seen anything like it before. Jake frowned, clearly uneasy. And you're sure it's safe? I've been alone with it all this time. He hasn't hurt me, Emma said firmly. In fact, he's been protective, like he warned me about something last week. Jake raised an eyebrow. Warned you how? Emma hesitated, unsure how much to tell him. Finally, she decided to show him instead of explaining. Grabbing her flashlight, she led him to the clearing where she'd found the remains of the hikers. Along the way, Buddy followed silently, keeping pace with them without making a sound. When they reached the site, Jake stopped dead in his tracks. The bodies were gone, dragged away by scavengers, most likely, but the signs of violence remained. Etched into the ground, blood stains had dried into the dirt, and scraps of torn clothing lay scattered among the leaves. Jake knelt down, examining the area closely. This doesn't look like any predator attack I've ever seen, he muttered. These cuts, they're too clean, too deliberate. That's what I thought, Emma said quietly. And Buddy led me here. He acted like he was warning me. Jake stood up, turning to look at Buddy, who stood a few feet away, watching them both. You're telling me this thing, whatever it is, knew about this before you did? That it somehow understood? What happened here? Emma nodded. I don't know how, but yeah, it's like he knows things he shouldn't. Jake stared at Buddy for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned back to Emma. We need to keep an eye on it. Whatever this creature is, it's not natural. And we can't trust it completely, not until we understand what it's capable of. Back at the campsite, tensions began to rise between Emma and Jake. Jake treated Buddy with suspicion, setting up cameras and motion detectors around the perimeter of the clearing. He also brought out a tranquilizer gun, which he kept within. Arm's reach at all times. To Emma, it felt unnecessary and worse, disrespectful. Buddy had shown no signs of aggression, yet Jake acted as though it were a ticking time bomb. You don't have to be so hostile. Emma snapped one evening as Jake adjusted the settings on one of his traps. He hasn't done anything wrong. He hasn't done anything right either, Jake shot back. We don't know what it is, Emma. It could turn on us at any moment. It's not an it, Emma said sharply. His name is Buddy, and he saved my life. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I get it. You've bonded with it, him, whatever. But emotions aren't going to keep us alive out here. We need to stay objective. Emma didn't respond. Instead, she walked over to Buddy, who was lying near the fire, and sat down beside him. Buddy lifted his head, gazing at her with those glowing eyes. She scratched behind his ears absent-mindedly, feeling a surge of frustration. How could she explain to Jake what she felt? That Buddy wasn't just some wild animal, that he was intelligent, maybe even sentient. Jake wouldn't believe her. He'd dismiss it as anthropomorphizing, reading human traits into a non-human creature. As the days passed, Jake became increasingly obsessed with capturing Buddy. He set up snares and baited traps, hoping to lure the creature into a controlled environment where he could study it. Each attempt failed miserably. Buddy avoided every trap with ease, slipping past cameras and sensors without triggering a single alert. It was as if he knew exactly what Jake was planning and how to counter it. One night, Jake decided to take matters into his own hands. Armed with a tranquilizer gun, he crept out of the tent while Emma slept. Buddy was lying near the fire, seemingly unaware of Jake's approach. Slowly, carefully, Jake raised the gun, aiming at the creature's side. But before he could pull the trigger, Buddy sprang to his feet, moving faster than Jake thought possible. In the blink of an eye, the gun was knocked from Jake's hands, skittering across the ground. Buddy stood between Jake and the weapon, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, with a low rumble, Buddy backed away, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. Jake returned to the tent shaken, his confidence rattled. When Emma woke up the next morning and saw the tranquilizer gun lying broken on the ground, she confronted him immediately. "What were you thinking?" she demanded, her voice sharp with anger. "You could have gotten yourself killed. I was trying to protect us." Jake shot back. "How can you be so blind? That thing isn't safe." "What?" "Not a thing," Emma shouted. She stopped herself, realizing she didn't have the words to finish the sentence. How could she explain Buddy to someone who refused to see beyond the surface? Frustrated and hurt, she stormed off into the woods, leaving Jake sitting by the fire, staring after her. And yet, despite everything, she trusted him. Somehow deep down, she believed that Buddy would never intentionally harm her. Whether Jake agreed or not, that trust was real and it was enough to keep her going, even as the mysteries of the forest grew darker and more dangerous. Document. Part 4. The tension between Emma and Jake only grew thicker as the days passed. The forest, once a place of wonder and discovery for Emma, now felt heavy with unease. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made her glance over her shoulder, wondering if Buddy was nearby or if something else lurked in the shadows. Jake's constant suspicion didn't help. He spent most of his time checking traps, reviewing footage from his cameras, and muttering under his breath about how reckless Emma was being. "You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment," Jake said one evening as they sat by the fire. His tone was sharp, almost accusing. "This isn't just some stray dog you've taken in. It's a wild animal, Emma, and it's dangerous." Emma clenched her fists, but forced herself to stay calm. She knew arguing wouldn't change his mind. "He's not like other animals," she replied quietly. "You haven't seen him the way I have. He's different." "Different doesn't mean safe," Jake shot back. "Just because he hasn't hurt you yet doesn't mean he won't." Emma wanted to argue further, to explain that Buddy had saved her life more than once. But she stopped herself. Jake wasn't ready to hear it, not yet. Instead, she turned her attention to Buddy, who was lying on the edge of the clearing, watching them both with those glowing eyes. Even from a distance, she could sense his presence, steady and unwavering. It gave her a small measure of comfort. Even amidst the growing chaos, the next morning, Emma decided to take matters into her own hands. She needed answers about Buddy, about the strange events in the forest, and about the mutilated bodies she'd found. If Jake couldn't or wouldn't help her, then she'd have to figure things out herself. Grabbing her backpack and a flashlight, she set off into the woods before Jake woke up. Buddy followed silently, sticking close to her side as she navigated the dense underbrush. They walked for hours, deeper into the forest than Emma had ever ventured before. The air grew cooler, and the sunlight filtering through the canopy became dimmer. Eventually they reached an area that looked unfamiliar, a stretch of land dotted with moss-covered rocks and twisted tree roots. Something about it felt ancient, as though it had been untouched by humans for centuries. As they moved forward, Buddy suddenly stopped, his ears perking up. Emma froze, following his gaze. Ahead of them, partially hidden behind a cluster of trees, was the entrance to a cave. Its mouth was dark and jagged, almost like a gaping wound in the earth. A shiver ran down Emma's spine, but curiosity pushed her forward. Buddy hesitated for a moment, then padded ahead, leading the way. Inside the cave, the air was damp and cold, carrying a faint metallic smell that made Emma wrinkle her nose. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing walls covered in strange markings. At first, she thought they were natural formations in the rock, but as she examined them more closely, she realized they weren't random. They were symbols, geometric patterns carved into the stone with precision. "What is this?" Emma whispered, running her fingers over the carvings. They felt smooth, almost polished, as though they'd been touched countless times over the years. Buddy stood beside her, his tail swishing slowly as he watched her explore. Further into the cave, Emma discovered something even more unsettling: bones. Piles of them scattered across the floor and stacked neatly against the walls. Some were small, likely belonging to rodents or birds, while others were larger, possibly deer or elk. But what caught her attention were the human remains skulls and femurs arranged in deliberate patterns, their surfaces clean and free of bloodstains. Just like the bodies she'd found earlier, these bones showed no signs of violence, as if whoever or whatever had done this hadn't killed out of hunger or rage. It was something else entirely. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Was this Buddy's doing? Had he brought her here to show her this? She turned to look at him, searching for answers in his glowing eyes. Buddy met her gaze steadily, his expression unreadable. For the first time since they'd met, Emma felt a flicker of doubt. What if Jake was right? What if Buddy wasn't? As harmless as she believed? Before she could dwell on the thought, a low rumble echoed through the cave. It wasn't coming from Buddy, it was deeper, resonating from somewhere farther inside. The sound sent a jolt of fear through Emma, and she instinctively stepped back toward the entrance. Buddy moved quickly, positioning himself between her and the source of the noise. His body tensed, every muscle coiled and ready to strike. "Buddy, what is that?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Buddy didn't respond, but his posture told her everything she needed to know. Whatever was making that noise, it wasn't friendly. The rumbling grew louder, accompanied by the faint sound of scraping metal. Emma's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Panic began to rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. Turning off the light might conserve its battery, so she clicked it off and relied on the dim glow of Buddy's eyes to guide her. Together, they backed toward the exit, moving as quietly as possible. Just as they reached the mouth of the cave, the rumbling stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. It felt unnatural, oppressive. Buddy paused, glancing back into the darkness before nudging Emma gently with his nose. She understood the message. It was time to leave. By the time they returned to the campsite, the sun was setting, bathing the forest in hues of orange and pink. Jake was waiting for them, pacing anxiously near the fire. When he saw Emma, his relief was evident, but it quickly turned to anger. "Where the hell were you?" he demanded, his voice rising. "I woke up and you were gone. You have any idea how dangerous that was?" "I'm fine," Emma said firmly, brushing past him to drop her backpack on the ground. "And I found something." Jake frowned. "What do you mean you found something?" Cave M explained. "There were bones inside human bones, and these weird symbols carved into the walls. Buddy led me there." Jake's expression darkened. "You went into a cave with that thing? Alone?" "It wasn't like that," Emma snapped. "He was protecting me." There was something else. In there, something I couldn't see. Jake stared at her, clearly skeptical. "You're telling me you trust that creature more than you trust me?" "Yes," Emma shouted, surprising even herself. "Because unlike you, Buddy hasn't given me a reason not to." The words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Jake opened his mouth to argue, but closed it again, shaking his head. "Fine," he muttered. "Do whatever you want. But don't come crying to me when it turns on you." With that, he stormed off into the woods. Leaving Emma alone with Buddy, she watched him go, feeling a mix of frustration and guilt. She didn't want to fight with Jake. He was her friend, after all, but she couldn't ignore what she'd seen. The cave, the symbols, the bones. They were pieces of a puzzle she needed to solve, and Buddy was the key. Sitting down by the fire, Emma sighed and rubbed her temples. Buddy settled beside her, his warm fur brushing against her arm. Despite everything, she felt grateful to have him there. Whatever secrets he held, whatever mysteries surrounded him, she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't face them alone. Not anymore. Document. Part 5. The night after Emma and Buddy returned from the cave, the forest seemed quieter than usual. The chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the breeze were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that made Emma uneasy. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames as her mind replayed the events of the day. The symbols carved into the walls of the cave lingered in her thoughts, their shapes sharp and precise, unlike anything she'd ever seen before. They weren't Random scratches or natural formations, they were deliberate, almost like a language. And then there were the bones, arranged so methodically, as if someone had taken great care to organize them. Buddy lay nearby, his glowing eyes reflecting the flickering light of the fire. He seemed calm, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that he was on edge too. His ears twitched occasionally, catching sounds she couldn't hear, and his tail swished slowly across the ground. Whatever had been in the cave, the source of that low, metallic rumbling, was still out there. Emma didn't know what it was, but she could sense its presence. Lurking just beyond the edges of her understanding, Jake hadn't come back yet. After their argument earlier, he'd stormed off into the woods, muttering something about needing space. Emma hoped he would return soon. Despite their differences, she didn't want him wandering alone in the dark. 8. The forest felt wrong tonight. Heavier somehow, as though it were holding its breath. As the hours passed, Emma grew more restless. She tried jotting down notes about the cave and the symbols, but her pen hovered over the page, unsure where to begin. How could she describe something she barely understood? Finally, she gave up and leaned back against a log, closing her eyes. Sleep wouldn't come. Easily not with the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on her. But maybe rest would help clear her mind. It was then that Buddy stood up suddenly, his body tense and alert. Emma opened her eyes, following his gaze toward the edge of the clearing. At first she saw nothing but shadows, the darkness blending seamlessly with the trees. Then movement caught her attention, a faint shimmer, like heat rising off pavement, rippling through the air. It wasn't solid, not like an animal or a person. Instead, it seemed to shift and twist, defying logic and physics. Emma's breath caught in her throat. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Buddy stepped forward, placing himself between Emma and the strange figure. His growl was low and deep, vibrating through the ground beneath her feet.
Whatever this thing was, Buddy recognized its hand.
He didn't trust it. The shimmering form began to take shape, resolving into something humanoid, but distinctly alien. Its body was sleek and angular, covered in a material that looked like liquid metal flowing over its frame. Its face was featureless, except for 2 glowing slits where eyes should have been, radiating a cold, mechanical intelligence. Without sound, gliding closer until it stood just outside the circle of firelight, Emma's heart raced. Instinctively, she reached for the flashlight beside her, gripping it tightly as though it might offer some kind of protection. "What are you?" she stammered, her voice trembling. The creature tilted its head slightly, studying her with those empty, glowing slits. It didn't speak, not with words anyway, but Emma felt a sudden pressure in her mind as though thoughts were being forced into her consciousness. Images flashed before her eyes, stars, planets, vast cities floating in the void of space. She saw civilizations rising and falling, entire worlds consumed by war and destruction. And then she saw Earth, fragile and vulnerable, teetering on the brink of collapse. When the vision faded, Emma gasped, clutching her head as dizziness washed over her. Buddy remained steadfast, his growl growing louder as the creature took another step forward. This time, however, it stopped abruptly, tilting its head again as though listening to something only it could hear. After a moment, it turned and glided back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Emma stared at the spot where it had been, her mind reeling. What had she just witnessed? Was it real, or had she imagined it? She turned to Buddy, searching for answers in his glowing eyes. He looked back at her steadily, his posture relaxing slightly now that the creature was gone. "Was that one of your kind?" Emma asked softly, her voice shaking. Buddy didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. Whatever that thing was connected to him in some way? Hours later, Jake finally returned to the campsite. His expression was grim, and his clothes were damp with dew, suggesting he'd been walking for a long time. When he saw Emma sitting by the fire, wide awake and visibly shaken, his anger softened into concern. "What happened?" he asked, dropping his gear onto the ground. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think I did," Emma replied, her voice hollow. She hesitated, unsure how much to tell him. Would he believe her, or would he dismiss it as exhaustion or paranoia.
Right.
Finally, she decided to start with the basics. Something came here tonight. Something not human. Jake frowned, glancing around the clearing. Where is it now? Oh. It left, Emma said. But Buddy chased it away, or at least, I think he did. Shh. Jake looked at Buddy, who was lying near the fire, watching them both intently. That thing doesn't chase anything away without a reason, he muttered. What did it want? Emma shook her head. I don't know. It showed me. Things like visions of other worlds, other civilizations. Jake raised an eyebrow. Clearly skeptical. Visions. You're saying it messed with your head? I don't know how else to explain it, Emma admitted. It felt real, and Buddy reacted to it too. He knew it was dangerous. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. This whole situation is insane, Emma. First the bodies, then the cave, and now this. We need to get out of here. Whatever's going on, it's bigger than us. Emma wanted to agree with him to pack up and leave while they still could, but something inside her resisted. She couldn't walk away, not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. We can't leave yet, she said firmly. It's not until we figure out what's happening. Jake stared at her, frustration evident in his expression. You're letting that thing manipulate you, he said, pointing at Buddy. It's playing games with you, Emma. Can't you see that? No, Emma shot back. He's protecting me. If it weren't for him, I'd probably be dead right now. Jake threw up his hands in exasperation. Fine, stay here and play hero if that's what you want. But don't say I didn't warn. With that, he retreated to his tent, leaving Emma alone with Buddy once again. She watched him go, feeling a pang of guilt. Jake was scared, that much was obvious, and she couldn't blame him. But she also couldn't ignore what she'd experienced. Whatever Buddy was, whatever role he played in all of this, she needed to understand it, not just for herself, but for everyone who might be affected by whatever was hiding in these woods. As the night wore on, Emma drifted in and out of sleep, her dreams filled with fragments of the vision she'd seen. Stars exploded into supernovas, planets crumbled under the weight of their own destruction, and shadowy figures moved silently through the ruins of civilizations. Through it all, Buddy was there, guiding her, showing her glimpses of truths she couldn't fully comprehend. When morning came, Emma woke with a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing for certain. Buddy wasn't just an ordinary creature. He was part of something far greater, something ancient and incomprehensible. And whether Jake believed her or not, she was determined to follow wherever the truth led Evan, if it meant confronting forces beyond her understanding. Document. Part 6. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting golden light across the campsite. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions and fears. But one thought kept surfacing above the rest. Buddy wasn't just an animal. He was something else entirely, something connected to the strange, shimmering figure from the night before, and possibly even to the symbols in the cave. Jake emerged from his tent, looking tired and disheveled. He glanced at Emma briefly before heading to the edge of the clearing to splash water on his face. The tension between them was thick, unspoken but undeniable. Emma knew he didn't trust Buddy, or her judgment for that matter, but she couldn't bring herself to apologize, not when she believed she was doing the right thing. After a while, Jake walked over and dropped onto a log near the fire. He said, breaking the silence, "What's the plan?" Emma hesitated. She hadn't fully decided yet, but she knew they couldn't stay idle. "We need to go back to the cave," she said finally. "There's more there we haven't seen. Maybe clues about what that thing was." Jake frowned. "You mean the alien ghost or whatever it was? Why would we want to look for more trouble?" "'Cause we're already in trouble," Emma replied sharply. "Something's going on here, Jake. Something big. And if we don't figure it out, we might not make it out of these woods alive." Jake sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine, but I'm coming with you this time. No more running off alone." Emma nodded reluctantly. She didn't like the idea of dragging Jake along. He clearly didn't trust Buddy, and his constant suspicion only made things harder, but she also knew she could use his help. If nothing else, he could carry some of the equipment. Later that morning, They set off toward the cave, Buddy leading the way. The journey felt longer than before the forest. Denser and darker, shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the air carried a faint metallic temps that made Emma's skin crawl. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird felt louder, sharper, as though the woods themselves were holding their breath. When they reached the cave, Buddy stopped at the entrance and turned to look at Emma. His glowing eyes seemed to urge caution, a silent warning that danger lurked within. Emma nodded, understanding the message. "Let's be careful," she whispered to Jake, tightened his grip on the flashlight in his hand. Inside the cave, the atmosphere grew heavier. The carvings on the walls glimmered faintly, catching the beam of Jake's flashlight. Emma traced her fingers over the symbols again, marveling at their precision. They weren't random scratches. They were deliberate, almost like instructions, written in a language she couldn't read. Buddy stayed close, his body tense and alert, his ears swiveling to catch every sound. Deeper in the cave, they found something new, a cluster of crystals embedded in the rock wall. They pulsed faintly, emitting a soft blue light that illuminated the surrounding area. Emma approached cautiously, reaching out to touch one of the crystals. As soon as her fingers brushed against its surface, a jolt of energy shot through her arm, making her gasp and pull back. "What was that?" Jake asked, stepping closer. "I don't know," Emma admitted, shaking her hand to ease the tingling sensation, "but it's not natural." Buddy moved forward, nudging Emma gently with his nose. It was clear he wanted her to step away from the crystals. Reluctantly, she obeyed, backing up until she stood beside Jake, together. They watched as the crystals began to glow brighter, their light pulsing in rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them trembled. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the walls of the cave. Emma staggered, grabbing onto Jake to steady herself. Buddy growled, his body coiled and ready to spring. The crystal's glow intensified, bathing the entire chamber in blinding blue light, and then it stopped. The trembling ceased, the hum faded, and the crystals dimmed until they returned to their original state. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was deafening. "What just happened?" Jake muttered, his voice shaky. Emma shook her head. "I don't know, but I think we woke something up." As they left the cave, the forest seemed different. The air was colder, and the shadows stretched longer than before. Buddy led them back to the campsite, moving faster than usual, his urgency palpable. When they arrived, Emma noticed something odd. The fire she'd left burning earlier was out. The ashes were cold, untouched since they'd left. "That's not possible," Jake said, frowning. "We weren't gone long enough for the fire to burn out completely." Emma scanned the area, her heart pounding. Everything looked normal. Tents were still standing, their gear untouched, but something felt wrong. It was too quiet, too still. Even the birds had stopped singing. Before she could say anything, Buddy let out a low growl, his hackles rising. Emma turned to follow his gaze and froze. Standing at the edge of the clearing was the shimmering figure from the night before. This time, however, it wasn't alone. Two others flanked it, their forms identical, their featureless faces glowing with the same cold intelligence. "They're here," Emma whispered. Gripping Jake's arm tightly, Jake swore under his breath, raising the flashlight like a weapon. "What do they want?" Emma didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward, her focus locked on the creatures. Buddy moved with her, staying by her side as she approached them slowly. She didn't know why she felt compelled to do so, but something deep inside told her that running wouldn't help. These beings weren't here to harm her, at least, not directly. They wanted something. One of the figures tilted its head slightly, studying her with those empty slits. Again, Emma felt the pressure in her mind, the flood of images and sensations overwhelming her senses. She saw stars collapsing into black holes, planets consumed by fire, civilizations vanishing into dust. And then she saw Earth, teeming with life but fragile, on the verge of destruction. Through the chaos of the vision, a single thought emerged, clear and undeniable. Balance. The word echoed in her mind, resonating like a bell. These creatures weren't invaders or conquerors, they were enforcers, tasked with maintaining equilibrium in the universe. Humanity, with its unchecked growth and destruction of nature, had disrupted that balance. And now, they were here too. Correct it. When the vision ended, Emma collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Buddy nudged her gently, steadying her as she struggled to regain her footing. The creatures remained motionless, watching her with their emotionless gazes. "What did they show you?" Jake demanded, rushing to her side. Emma took a deep breath, trying to put the experience into words. "There. Guardians," she said finally. "They watch over worlds, making sure life doesn't destroy itself, and Earth, we're failing. We're using up everything, killing each other, ruining the planet. They're here because of us." Jake stared at her, disbelief etched across his face. "You're saying aliens are here to save the environment? That's insane." "It's true," Emma insisted. "And Buddy, he's part of it. He's one of them, but different. Chose to protect me instead of following their orders." At the mention of his name, Buddy let out a low rumble, his glowing eyes fixed on the creatures. One of them tilted its head again, as though acknowledging him. Then, without another sound, the three figures turned and disappeared into the trees. Leaving the clearing eerily quiet once again, Emma sat there for a long time, her mind racing. She didn't fully understand what she'd seen or heard, but one thing was certain: humanity was running out of time. The balance the creatures spoke of wasn't just about nature, it was about survival. People didn't change, Earth would become another dead world, lost to the void of space. "What do we do now?" Jake asked, his voice quieter than before. Emma looked at him, then at Buddy, who stood silently beside her. "We tell someone," she said firmly. "We spread the word. People need to know what's at stake." Jake hesitated, then nodded. "All right. But how do we explain any of this without sounding crazy?" Emma smiled faintly. "We start with the truth, and we hope someone listens." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in shadow, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she couldn't face them alone. With Buddy by her side, and maybe even Jake, despite his doubts, she was ready to fight. For the future of the planet, because if humanity didn't learn to live in harmony with the world around them, there might not be a future left to save.